Coming up, despite all his efforts, Rishi Sunak isn't convincing voters to believe in him. Not only are a lot of his talking points not resonating with the priorities of voters, but he's absolutely rubbish at politics too. And that means that not only does he have a problem with his party's ever worsening polling position, but also he's now struggling to convince his own ministers to believe in him. It may seem to have all gone quiet in the past week with MPs away from Westminster for the Easter holes, but it hasn't stopped the number of political headaches continuing to pile up for Sunak. The way things are shaping up, it looks like he'll be forced into either resigning or calling a general election straight after next month's predicted thrashing in the local elections. Stay tuned. I'm not a betting man these days, but if I was, my money would be on Rishi Sunak's government not making it as far as the autumn. There seems to be a constant stream of stories about rebellions amongst his own party, and even amongst his own ministers, that suggest the expected 2nd of May council election wipeout will be the final nail in Sunak's political coffin. Just this week, the rebellion's snowball appeared to be gathering pace. First, there was the story about a revolt over his plan to criminalise homelessness by dozens of his own MPs, with the Times reporting dozens of Tory MPs on the party's left and right are prepared to challenge proposals in the criminal justice bill to move on, fine or jail rough sleepers. These unlikely rebels included former Tory leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith and the former Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green, who both signed amendments to the bill. And the campaign is being coordinated by the influential Bob Blackman, Joint Secretary of the Conservative Backbench 1922 Committee. Damien Green, like most normal people, made clear he felt that the government should be focusing on a practical way forward to help people off the streets, rather than criminalising them, with many other MPs attacking the government's heavy-handed approach. Only a billionaire like Rishi Sunak or a sociopath like Suella Braverman, the original architect of the bill, could think that imposing fines of $2,500 on rough sleepers would be a good idea. Does Sunak think these people are choosing to sleep rough, that they've got $2,500 tucked away in some Coots account? It's so tin-eared and out of touch, it actually makes him look stupid. Not just to the electorate, but to his own cabinet, whose faith in him seems to be becoming increasingly shaky. And that's true both from the so-called One Nation group of Conservative ministers and MPs and the traditional right of the party, who are equally upset about this because they think it's not the compassionate conservatism that they've tried to steer their party towards over the past few decades. They don't think that their party should be criminalising people for simply being homeless, or indeed, as the Times article says, for just looking as though they might be about to sleep rough, which is a very Braverman-esque thing to try to define in law. The Murdoch Times is generally thought of as a pro-government paper, but it also carried another front-page article this week about how long waits in accident and emergency are killing 250 people every week. That's 14,000 excess deaths just last year alone. People understand that the nurses and the medics are doing their absolute level best, so it must be all down to either underfunding by Sunak's government or funding going to the wrong areas. Agency staff, management consultancy or private finance initiatives. Whatever, what people care about is the size of the waiting list. And this graphic, based on a Financial Times analysis, shows just how bad the Tories in general have performed compared to the last Labour government, and particularly how badly Sunak's government has performed. Bear in mind that peak COVID was 4 years ago, and yet waiting lists continue to expand exponentially, with the NHS being rated the electorate's biggest issue, second only to the cost of living crisis. No wonder Sunak's allies are questioning his viability either as Prime Minister or as leader of the Tory party. This is the guy who is telling NHS trusts to save up to £4.5 billion at a time when they're struggling to get on top of waiting lists of well over 7 million people. Again, tin-eared Sunak doesn't seem to have a clue about the people's priorities. And the men in grey suits, as the parliamentary Tory party likes to call them, are really wondering what Rishi Sunak actually stands for. Each week they're being asked to support a piece of legislation that contradicts what was going on in the previous week. And so we're seeing Tory MPs thinking, well, I'm just going to do my own thing. They're just fed up with defending the indefensible, be it the £15 million donation from Frank Hester after he'd been awarded £135 million contracts with the NHS by the Tory party. 1 minute, according to Number 10, he'd made non-racist but rude comments, but the next minute they apparently were racist. Or then there's the ridiculous Rwanda policy that will cost the UK £1.8 million for each of the 300 people they eventually hope to send to Rwanda under the scheme. That's over £500 million that could have been spent on schools or the NHS. Or then there's defending the party against the outcry over the suggestion that homeless people might be banned from erecting tents in bad weather, a policy that they've now apparently dropped. These ministers and MPs are sent out dutifully to toe the Tory line, and then within days, or sometimes even hours, they're made fools of as the directive comes down from Sunak to change tack. That's why you've got more and more ministers who are thinking pragmatically, well, I'm not going to defend this because I can't see this lasting the week. No wonder 63 Tory MPs have already said they'll be standing down at the next election, and that number includes 16 ministers or ex-ministers. They've just had enough of defending the indefensible. Either that, or they've realised that the game is up. This week saw a couple of MRP polls. MRP stands for multi-level regression and post-stratification, and these are the most accurate kind of polls delving into individual constituencies. The Best for Britain poll carried out by Survation puts the Tories at 98 seats after the next election, and the other poll for the Daily Mail was even worse for Sunak's Tories. And the good news doesn't stop there. Not only are Reform UK Party Limited predicted to win 0 seats, but both the Prime Minister's own seat plus that of his Chancellor Jeremy Hunt are both at high risk. Ministers, including Cleverly, Lady of the Lake Mordaunt and the shapeshifter Shapps, are predicted to lose their seats. And the good news keeps coming. The Tories will be a party of England only, with 0 seats in Wales or Scotland. No wonder Sunak is struggling to convince his own ministers to believe in him. When MPs see these sort of polls month after month, it's hardly surprising that there's this continual talk of a move against him. Sunak just isn't very good at politics. He idiotically set out 5 pledges for the end of last year. The only one of them that was achieved after his deadline of the end of 2023 had passed. It wasn't something under his control anyway. That was on inflation, with an independent Bank of England tasked with controlling inflation, as Sunak himself often pointed out when inflation was rising. This was just one in a series of blunders that have led even his own MPs to think he can't get anything right. Rumours are that letters of no confidence coming into Graham Brady, head of the backbench Tory 1922 committee, may have reached anywhere between 40 and 51. And to give these claims more credibility, Brady called Sunak in for a meeting last month, presumably to warn him that the numbers going in were rapidly approaching the 53 threshold that would trigger a full no-confidence vote. For a while, Tory MPs were thinking they couldn't possibly even contemplate another leadership change, but are now thinking that almost literally anyone else would be better placed to lead them into an election than Sunak. Of course, yet another leadership election would make them look even more ridiculous. But against that, many Tory MPs are starting to wonder whether Rishi Sunak himself is one of the major factors in their dire polling position. After all, he was only granted the position purely on the grounds that he would improve the party's polling after the cataclysm of the Trust's 45-day premiership. He hasn't done that, so no wonder that his prospects of surviving until the autumn look increasingly desperate.